Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bloodworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today I'm going to be talking about Honor Among Thieves, looking at its box office, which is still somewhat projected. I understand that, and my tagline is basically that they fell woefully short of what their hopes was, or what their hopes were, and there's a difference between hopes and expectations. I don't think that their expectations were very high. And when I say they, I'm talking about Hasbro. All right. And I don't believe that their expectations were high for this. And it appears that they were kind of well founded. And I will lay the groundwork for that belief that I have, that opinion that I have. So, why has Honor Among Thieves failed to reach its box office hopes? I think that many people are going to say, "Oh, it was the OGL crisis. I put this back to earlier than that." That certainly didn't help, but I put this back to the very first trailer that was released. So they had several obstacles, negative expectations for any D&D movie. And the first obstacle is that it's a D&D movie. And so it's very niche right from the get-go. Uh, Not very many non-gamers are going to see a movie that is specifically labeled Dungeons and Dragons. They have no connection to it. There's no mystique about the brand name D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, to non-players. They just, I think a lot of times we think, oh, everyone in the world knows about Dungeons and Dragons, and actually they don't. All right? Very few people actually do. And so you have that. Once you slap on Dungeons and Dragons, you're kind of niching your movie or any of your product that you're looking to push into a very very small population. That's number one. Then they came out with their first trailer, and to be honest, the first trailer and really none of the trailers really made you want to go see this movie. It just didn't look that great. Right from the get-go, there was nothing compelling about bringing even someone who really enjoys Dungeons and Dragons and been playing it for decades. Looking at those trailers, we were not very optimistic. I certainly wasn't. Then I base my opinion mostly on that first interview with the cast. And I've said this multiple times over these last weeks and even months prior to the movie being released, was that their initial their initial interview, Michelle Rodriguez was the only one that seemed to be enthusiastic about this movie. Chris Pine was. I just got the impression that he was like, "Yeah, this is a check. This is a one and done. All right, no investment in the project post having done it and been paid." Hugh Grant, it was almost like he wanted to put his head in his hand, in his hand, and basically say, this is where my career is at. Um, I really got that like Jeremy Irons sense from him, going from being a top of the ticket name in probably the 90s for romantic comedies, and then ending up here. I'm sure that, he was not expecting more than just a paycheck from this and that's it. The rest of the cast kind of just fell into the background, so which might be understandable, but the real names here that might have drawn in a younger crowd, would be like Sophie Lillis, or the girl from It, which is what most people remember her as. And there just wasn't enough of there just wasn't enough casting wise that I think we're going to attract in a a younger crowd. I mean, all of these individuals, with the exception you know, of the actress that plays the druid, they're all in their 30s and 40s. Um, I believe possibly the um, Smith is 29, but still, they're not attracting that teenage audience or high aged teenage audience. Um, so that was something that I thought was kind of a misstep, and I wasn't anticipating this movie doing very well, even if it released. Next, or even when it released. Next, this is long before OGL. Hasbro actively advertised that they were looking to sell Entertainment One. That gave the impression that we know this movie is a turd and we're trying to, offload it before it actually releases. That doesn't send a good message out there. And on top of that, they delayed they delayed the release a couple of times. I believe twice they delayed the release of the movie as well. Possibly that's for rewrites. Possibly that's for whatever issues they were coming across. Maybe there was something that released in the December time block that they were like, no, we can't have it go then. Then the OGL debacle occurred. And at that time, it was the 5e community that rejected the OGL 1.1, and it was the 5e community that said stay away from Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, and this movie in particular, and as well as D&D Beyond and all of that. It was the 5e community that had the most influence over not going to see this movie. And for the most part, I think that they were probably successful within their own viewership. All right. Then the movie was released in the Amazon release. All right, and there have been a couple trailers before that as well. None, in my opinion, really making it a must-go see movie. So none of the trailers really pushed this movie forward. At least for me, and I'm sure not a lot of other people familiar with the game. We were starting to look at the trailer, and people who are more familiar with 5e than I am were pointing out the various deficits to the movie. There were even more so from people who are in the know. Like I just finished watching Ed Greenwood's take on the movie, where he pointed out five, which he later considered to be fairly small um, rules getting done wrong, and even some even some of the stuff, the world lore, being off as well. But he said ultimately it was a fun romp of a movie to watch, and no one denied that. I mean, I don't think anybody, including myself, when I saw this movie, I saw it and I was like, all right, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So the OGL debacle takes place. Then the writers, directors of this movie came out and they said, oh, we intentionally emasculated the lead male roles because we find that to be a fun thing to do. All right. I have never heard a more stupid thing to have ever been said prior to a release of your project. I mean, you're basically saying it's almost as if Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast do not understand that at least 60% of their consumers are male. All right. And, a good portion of them are older than the younger crowd. All right. A good portion of them have been playing Dungeons and Dragons for decades. And you're not selling your movie if you come out and you say stupid things like Kyle Brinks did. You know, the people that look like me, white males, can't leave this hobby fast enough. Now, whether he meant Wizards of the Coast administrative, or executives or the player base, it doesn't matter. All right, it's not how you meant it to be, it's how people perceived it to be, and he never backtracked from that. So that had to hurt. All right, then the two directors come out, and I can only imagine either stupidly or intentionally sabotaged their own sales, because when you say that we're going to make men look stupid and foolish and and incompetent and whatever, and that most of your viewership is male, how many are going to say, I don't need to sit there and see that, I'm not going to pay money to a company that actively hates me? And so they're not going to do it. All right. And it's just a totally disconnected way to promote your product by trying to tell people, I hate you, but I still want you to spend money on my product. It's just dumb. All right. So we get through all of that, and the OGL and the the directors coming out and saying, well, we did this stupidly. And then the movie releases, and Amazon does a big thing. Amazon Prime, you could buy your tickets in advance and see it on March 19th. And people went in, and including myself, and I saw it, and I was like, well, that wasn't as much a dumpster fire as I was expecting it to be. And it did taint my rating of the movie to a certain extent, right? When you're expecting to be fed a dog shit sandwich, and it's just some stale bread and something that's meant to be edible, but nothing more than that, so no condiments, no seasoning, no anything. It's just a slice of bologna on stale bread. Is it edible? Yes. Is it anything? Is it better than what you were expecting? Yes, absolutely. But it's certainly not something that you're going to go back to see again. All right. It is a very unmemorable meal. And this movie was a very unmemorable movie. Why was it unmemorable? The story was blah. Nothing, nothing exciting about it. um, you knew watching this movie, and spoilers, if I haven't said it already, watching this movie from scene to scene to scene, that the characters are always going to accomplish whatever they are mediocrely challenged with in each and every scene. From scene to scene to scene that they're going to be successful, that they're going to crack some kind of a joke, and then move on to the next scene. And it's the same formula over and over and over again. And quite frankly, even though the actors did a reasonably good job with their acting and everything, you almost cared about their characters, other than the fact that you knew that they were never at any risk. And then you finally get to the end of the movie, and I mean, I was literally sitting there, and I was like, not a single injury. They didn't get dirty. not a hair out of place, not a challenge that gave them a setback, certainly not one that they couldn't overcome and had to just totally re-go about their whole, their whole avenue of getting to the end scene. The villains, and I'm not including Hugh Grant's character because he was fairly well acted and he was fairly interesting, but the other villains that you had nothing about them. They were two dimensional. Uh, don't know what their motivations were other than possibly just like a nihilistic motivation of destroying the world. Um, Nothing there. No reasoning why. So just a real flavorless. There's a thing that we say in Dungeons and Dragons is like, the hardest character to, evil character to create and make interesting is chaotic evil, and that's all that they did here. They created bland, emotionless, chaotic evil enemies with no intelligence behind what they were doing, no motivation behind what they're doing. It was just boring. It was lazy and boring to produce those kinds of, ultimate enemies that they were fighting against. And again, you had no expectation that the characters were going to fail as they go through this. Too many disconnects between what can be done in the game and what can be done here. I am telling you that if you see this movie and you've never played Dungeons and Dragons, and then you go to play Dungeons and Dragons, specifically 5th edition, you are not going to be able to experience anything from the movie in that game unless the dungeon master has no clue what the hell they're doing. All right, because this was not a reflection of what the game does. All right, this is just sheer storytelling and no risk, no real reward for it, and that's it. I mean, there was nothing to this movie of any real substance. Let me get to the last scene, and again, spoiler alert. Finally, in the last battle, one of the characters, and I won't say which one, gets stabbed with a dagger that is a instant kill dagger, basically. And the person dies, and then they have not an ability, not a spell, not anything that they, had to really face any kind of real risk or challenge to get. Use this item and it brings the character back to life within that second. I mean, it was literally dead, brought back to life within, let's say, a minute. Um, and then that was the end of the movie. And it was like, what was the point of all of this? There was no real point of all of this, and so that's the reason why this movie was expected to fail, and it kind of delivered on that failure with just one exception, that it was entertaining. But an entertaining movie is it's 2 hours spent and never to be thought about again. All right. It's like the one hit wonder of the music industry, right? Someone comes up with one great song, they play the crap out of it, and then it's never thought about until they do some kind of a retrospective, 30 years later, talking about the one hit wonders. This movie is not going to lead to any kind of a franchise. There is just not enough there to do it. They have characters that are not connected to the lore in any way. I mean, when they tried to do it with the wizard and connect them to Elminster, it was done half-assedly. Just saying, "Oh, he's the direct descendant of this." No, it's not going to bring people into it. All right, so you're not grabbing the 60% of your player base, all right, to make them watch this movie. All right, so let's talk about the numbers. This movie made roughly $38 million. Let's say 39 or even 40. Let's say it makes $40 million in its domestic box office. I believe I heard something like it made another 33 million, globally, but those numbers don't go directly to Paramount anyway. So that 33 million isn't real box office because they keep a greater share of the proceeds. I think in the local market, they only pass on something like 50% to Paramount. So the Paramount really only made, let's say, 35 million total of the 71 for this movie thus far. They laid out 150 to make the movie, probably another 150 to in advertising, and then the expectation from the shareholders is another 150 on top of that. This movie had to make overall at least $450 million just to be considered marginally successful. All right. So the numbers just aren't there. And despite what Rotten Tomatoes scoring is, Rotten Tomatoes does not have a good reputation for playing things you know square, fair and square in their reporting of the numbers, of the actual numbers. They tend to, and I'm going to say it out, they tend to delete negative reactions to movies. All right, especially movies that they want to promote, um, because they contain whatever message they want to promote, or they have a connection to they have a connection to the movie house, whether it be Paramount or Hasbro or whatever. They do not present the an accurate number because there's no way that 93% of the audience like this movie at that level. It's just not, there was not enough there for it to have those kinds of numbers. So, is the movie as bad as we were expecting it to be? No. Is it a movie that you should spend $10 or $15 to see? No. I would save your money and catch it when it's on Paramount Plus in before June. All right, I predict that it will be, or by June, before the summertime, this movie will be streaming. All right, most likely on Paramount Plus. So, I would not, and getting into those numbers again, right? So let's say 38 million or 40 million. That means that only about 4 million people saw this movie. All right, now there's supposedly, according to Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast, between 8 and 12 million active D&D players. So less than half of them, and we know a lot of people that aren't D&D players at all, saw this movie. So, but let's just say less than half of the current game consumer of Dungeons and Dragons saw this movie. That's horrible. I mean, that is absolutely horrible. And to think that, this wasn't just one thing that led to this. It was compiling. All right, so it was a pretty soft and boring story. It was bad marketing right from the get-go. It was a lack of enthusiasm by the actors in that first interview, and then it was all of these stupid missteps that both Hasbro and then later on even Paramount had made. Um, Getting this movie out in Amazon Prime 2 weeks before the release, I don't see that that was a benefit at all for this. So I think that they're going to look at that and be like, oh, we'll never do that again, because it wasn't like a big boom. I think they only made about 5 million in that, or a little over 4 million actually, in that first day of sales. I mean, and there are what, a billion people that have Amazon Prime. It wasn't like it was really hard to get to, and what there was in enough theaters that within easy driving distance to anybody that wanted to see this movie could have saw this movie on the Sunday, March 19th, and yet they chose not to. I can go and I can look at the seating charts for today's upcoming slots, and I did this all throughout the entire weekend. And pre-sales was not even 10% of the theater in any one particular time slot. In some time slots, it was completely empty in in reserved seating. I mean, there were not a single reserve seat taken up in some of those key time frames. But I looked also at just the prime time, the immediately following dinner time that most people see the movie, the 7 o'clocks, the 8 o'clocks, the 9 o'clocks, and even the 10 o'clocks. And not more than 10% of the theater in any one of those was reserved seating. That reserved seatings were taken up. I mean, were they expecting people to just walk in and just do the walk-ins for that kind of thing? That's certainly not going to fill the theater much more than another 20 to 40%, and you're still 50% capacity in it. This movie did not sell well, and it did not sell well for a number of reasons. But primarily, it just didn't sell well because they didn't package it well, and they didn't promote it, well, correctly. They made many, many missteps along the way. And quite frankly, I mean, they really did set it up to fail. And I think they ensured that there won't be a follow up of this. And they're going to have a damn hard time selling Entertainment One now. That was the earliest of their missteps, was when they tried to sell the production company that made this movie months before the movie was released. I mean, that was a pretty good indicator of what Hasbro felt they had in their hands. It's like, sell it now before the thing tanks in the theater. Fortunately, no one was stupid to bite that dog shit sandwich, and they instead said, no, I'm going to hold off and let's see how this thing does. So they might as well just fold Entertainment One up and put it on a shelf, because they're not going forward with this. They found an empty chest instead of box office gold, and that's how I will leave it off with that. And you all have a great day. And I'm sorry to you know, I really wish that they would make a D&D based movie, possibly without the label, and just make a great sword and sorcery movie that has, some grit to it, and, a modern presentation of it. So not too campy, be a little bit serious about it, and make it a true adventure with risk and reward, and with injuries and even death of main characters, to make it allow you to invest in it, and just do it smart. Smart and somewhat serious. It's okay to have a little joke here or there, but the Guardians of the Galaxy model is not going to work here. All right, it's just, it's not going, and it's wearing off where it has worked in the past. So we're kind of done with the superhero action movies, and D&D should not be presented that way. And it's the reason why it's losing that it's losing that appeal, because as the game keeps on moving towards that, fewer and fewer people are looking at it. We're looking to see a more serious presentation. We're looking to have more challenge in what we're seeing and what we're experiencing at the gaming table. And I think that it's why fifth edition is starting to falter ever since the end of the pandemic, and now it's people are looking elsewhere, at other game systems now, because they're just not getting that at the edge of your seat feel from playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. They certainly don't have that expectation in the newest one, and they didn't get it here in the movie. So, again, thanks for joining. I'm sorry to get up somewhat on a soapbox here, and trash the movie. I started at 78% for this movie, and the more and more I think about it and look at it, it keeps on trickling down. I don't anticipate remembering this movie to any great extent by next month. I mean, it'll be completely forgotten experience, uh, in my mind by next month. And I certainly wouldn't go out of my way to sit there and watch this movie again. Even if it were for free, because it's just not that kind of experience that I need to see again. There was nothing that was like, I didn't feel like I missed anything watching this movie, because there just wasn't that much depth in it. So I probably tried to shut this down 3 times already. I hope you like this video. You're free to disagree with me. Put it in the chat. Hey, this is why you're wrong. And but if you saw it the same way I did, feel free to pop in there and say, hey, you know what, I came away with the same experience, and the same feelings about it, and that's certainly welcome as well. So have a great rest of your day, and keep on gaming out there. Take care.